Caution. The AJ and Quill show contains D&D content and is intended for a D&D audience. And, besides that, they're really weird. Hi everyone, welcome to Total Party Quill. As always, I'm Professor AJ, and with me is my fearless companion, Quill the Dragon. Say hi, Quill.
Greetings, puny humans. Prepare to absorb the knowledge Quill will dispense with his mighty jaws.
Now, we started a series covering fey creatures and classes that you would use if you were going into the adventure The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which is the upcoming one for Dungeons & Dragons.
It's an encounter that takes place inside the Feywild.
Right, and the Feywild is the chaotic magical realm of fairies. Now that's fairies, not fairies.
But let's not waste any more time. What are we covering today?
In today's episode, we're going to be covering Korreds.
But what's a Korred?
Nothing. What's a Korred with you? Now, Korreds are actually really interesting fey creatures, and they don't really get enough playtime inside most adventures. They're a lot of fun, and they're hilarious.
But let's see what the book has to say about them.
Now, Korreds can be found on page 168 of Volo's Guide to Monsters. It's a CR7 chaotic neutral small fey, and they have 12d6 hit dice. If you look here, they have a movement speed of 30 feet and a burrow speed to match.
They have dark vision out to 120 feet and tremor sense that matches this.
Right, and that's huge for tremor sense.
They're proficient in athletics, perception, and stealth.
Right, and these are usually the kind of proficiencies you would see on an ambush hunter. And if you look here, Korreds also have a command hair ability, which is kind of interesting. They have an innate spell casting, they have stone camouflage, and stone strength. And for attacks, Korreds have a multi-attack where they can either attack twice with their great club, or they can hurl a rock.
Like a giant rock.
Twice. Let's see what the actual book has to say. Now, Korreds are unpredictable, secretive fey with strong ties to earth and stone. Because of their magical hair and their mysterious understanding of minerals, they're often sought out by treasure hunters, dwarves, and others who have a desire to get wealth from beneath the earth.
Speaking of earthly fey, Korreds prefer to keep their own company and occasionally will consort with creatures of elemental earth.
And you can actually see this represented in their innate spellcasting. They can cast Conjure Elemental once per day at 6th level. Now, a tribe of Korreds gathers weekly to perform a ceremonial dance, beating out rhythms on stone with their hooves and clubs. Now, dancing is very important to them. In the depths of the material plane, Korreds typically flee from other creatures, but become aggressive when they feel insulted, or if they're annoyed by things like the sound of mining or something.
Korreds can hurl boulders far larger than it seems like they should be able to.
And you can see this represented in their attacks. Now, in previous editions, it said that their magical connection to stone and earth is what allowed them to throw these giant boulders.
Now they might physically throw them, or they could simply ask the stones to fling themselves at their enemies.
Right, kind of like Ludo from the old Labyrinth movie.
Either way, it's a fun visual.
Now, no one knows the ways of stone and earth better than the Korred. Korreds can seemingly smell small veins of minerals in the earth. Now, a Korred on the surface can feel the rise and the fall of bedrock under the earth and in where caves lie. And underground, it knows the pathways through the stone for miles. Secret doors that would lead them through stone are as obvious to any Korred as a window would be to a human. Now, Korreds can also shape stone as though it were clay, and they can swim through rock. They can summon earth elementals and other creatures, and they gain supernatural strength from just standing on the ground.
A lot like Antaeus from Greek mythology. Now you can see all this represented in their natural 120-foot tremor sense.
Right, as well as their burrow speed and some of their magical innate casting abilities.
Now, one of the most interesting things about a Korred is their hair.
Now, Korreds all have hair all over their bodies, but the hair that grows from their head is particularly magical.
When a Korred's hair is cut, it transforms into whatever material was used to cut it.
Korreds use iron shears to cut lengths of their hair, and then they weave these lengths and strands together to create iron ropes that they can manipulate, animating them to bind or snake around creatures or objects.
You can see this in their command hair ability.
And Korreds take great pride in their hair, much like dwarves do with their beards.
And they take equally great offense to anyone who tries to cut a Korred's hair without permission.
Now, there's a legend about a merchant who tried to cut a Korred's hair with golden shears, and the Korred then fed him those shears from his swallow to his sitter. Now, these are really cool creatures, they're a lot of fun, and they're hilarious.
An encounter with Korreds that doesn't have people laughing isn't being done right.
But what doesn't the book actually tell you about them? Now, Korreds existed all the way back in 1st edition Dungeons & Dragons.
They used to have a laugh ability that would stun creatures.
And in 4th edition, it was said that they enjoyed a very dark humor. They liked things like lewd comments, practical jokes.
And they didn't particularly like mortals very much.
Right, they were usually depicted as mischievous with jerk-like tendencies, as opposed to outright evil.
Like many Fae.
And in the current edition, they're treated much more like mischievous and curious Fae rock gnomes.
Who love to dance and drink.
Now, there's a great article written by Ed Greenwood, the creator of The Forgotten Realms, that covered Korreds in Dragon number 119. Now, Korreds either dislike or they're afraid of intruders, and they want to entrap them using traps like deadfalls and pits and snares and nets that they weave out of their own hair.
But Korreds are known to tolerate rangers, druids, dwarves, gnomes, and earth genasi.
Generally, Korreds prefer rocky places to live.
Korreds live in rolling, rocky, forested countryland, and they dwell in well-hidden underground caverns and caves. Now, when Korreds encounter nice intruders, these intruders are simply incapacitated and carried off into a remote area and then freed.
Whereas not nice intruders to the Korred, people who are rude or try to attack them or kill them, are just beaten to death.
But all of a Korred's captives have their hair shorn off.
Now, if you look at their stats, Korreds carry great clubs made of stone. But if you wanted to, say, make an example for the shears that they carry, you could do this in their statistics using, say, a short sword or a scimitar to represent that. Now, female Korreds and male Korreds look virtually identical together.
It's the beards.
Although, Korreds themselves have absolutely zero problem telling the difference.
Korreds like to trap things and then they walk up and beat them with their clubs. And they can team up to slay bigger game by animating rocks as weapons.
Now, other than attacking, Korreds are typically hunters and fishers. They either kill their prey with their stone clubs or hurling rocks at them, or they weave nets and lines out of their own hair to capture fish.
Korreds collect edible fungi in the Underdark to eat.
And Korreds are also particularly well known for collecting woodland berries and burning them in giant stone pots to make a very special kind of Korred wine.
This wine can actually be used as part of the ingredients to make a filter of love.
Now, Korreds follow the god Tapan the Undying,
The father of the dance.
but the god of satyrs, Dam,
Which is actually an alias of Hircim, Prince of Fools, the satyr archfey.
anyway, he was also considered to be one of their patron gods. Now, something very important to Korreds is dancing.
Korreds dance in solitude as a form of self-calming and relaxation, or as a way to connect with their god.
Now, it was said that once a week, Korreds would gather together and join in a religious, musical circle dance. Now, this was usually performed in a woodland glade, or a clearing, or a hilltop.
A circle of mushrooms, or a stone circle created by raising stones.
Kind of like Stonehenge.
Korreds play the slap drum, or the blown flute, or simply just hum along.
Now, after a casual, free-form beginning to the dance, the dancers themselves will begin to move in unison, following the Elder Korred's movements.
The Elder Korred is the leader of the dance.
And to human eyes, anyway, the Korreds dance with an uncanny precision, building to a wild frenzy that almost always ends in unison with a shout and then an immediate collapse to the ground.
After that, all the dancers usually dine on berry wine and roasted livestock.
Right, like bear, deer, or wolves killed by the Korreds.
Now the circle dance drains the vitality out of a Korred, and aged or mortally injured Korreds strive to do the dance of death, as it's considered a great honor.
Right, back in 2nd edition, anyone who interrupted a Korred's dance would have to make a spell save, or they would themselves begin uncontrollably dancing, and they would lose up to 4 hit points per round that they did this, either until they were tied up, they broke the spell, or the Korreds left.
Now other Korreds are known to follow the Seldarine, and practically, a Korred's hair can be used as part of the ingredients to make a rope of entanglement, or nets of snaring.
Now that's all very cool, super interesting, but let's put it all together. How do Korreds behave in combat?
Now, Korreds are hilarious.
Right, Korreds are a small creature like gnomes, but they're ridiculously strong.
And they're tough. They have a sizable reservoir of hit points.
Right, and they gain 7 points of natural armor from their tough, rock-like skin.
Korreds are a ringer in any small Fey group.
Now, if you look at their statistics, they have a really high strength, and they have a really high constitution.
With strength being their primary offensive ability, and constitution being their primary defensive ability.
Now, this would usually indicate that they're a tank class. But if you actually run the math, Korreds will do way more damage hurling rocks at creatures rather than running up and getting in their face like a typical tank would.
And you can't forget that they can burrow through the earth as fast as they can run.
Right, they have a burrow speed and tremor sense so they can see while they're burrowing. And if you look here, they have proficiency in athletics, perception, and stealth. Now, this stealth coupled with their stone camouflage means that they're particularly good at hiding in stony areas.
So when you encounter Korreds, if they're not in the earth, they're probably going to be hiding among the rocks.
Now, if you look at the resistances, Korreds have damage resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical attacks. They're super tough.
They have long-range dark vision and tremor sense, and like Antaeus from the Greek myths, they do extra damage when standing on the ground.
Right, as opposed to, say, levitating off the ground or hanging from a tree or something.
Or swimming.
Now, Korreds also have an innate spell casting, and these spells generally revolve around earth and stone and those kind of things.
They can cast Conjure Elemental and Otto's Irresistible Dance each once per day.
Now, these are very thematic and they fit with the story, especially Otto's Irresistible Dance, because Korreds love to dance.
The DC to resist this is only 13.
Right, for their level, that's actually not going to be that hard for most creatures to resist. But there's a trick. You have to use these in unison.
Otto's Irresistible Dance is an action and it causes creature to begin a comedic dance, but more importantly, it gives disadvantage on dexterity saves and attack rolls until the target uses its action to try to save.
But if you look over at the Command Hair ability, it's a bonus action that can bind up a creature. That creature must then make a dexterity saving throw at DC 13, or it becomes grappled, and while it's grappled, it's also considered restrained. Now, I know that DC 13 save seems really piddly, but if you use Otto's Irresistible Dance first as an action, it'll give them disadvantage on their dexterity save to use your Command Hair ability as a bonus action.
This basically causes a -5 to the save for them, so the DC is actually more like 18.
Now, both Conjure Elemental and Otto's Irresistible Dance use concentration. And given a choice between the two, the Korred's probably going to use Conjure Elemental first. So, at the beginning of an encounter, if the Korred is aware that there are creatures it doesn't like in its vicinity, it's simply going to conjure an Elemental and have it deal with them.
While the Elemental is conjured, the Korred will either use its stone camouflage to hide so it can observe the encounter, or it will use Meld into Stone, or its burrow speed, and view the whole thing using its tremor sense.
Now, Earth Elementals are really basic. They're brute creatures. They run in, they start hitting things, and they don't really move around all that much.
Hopefully, the Elemental will scare off these creatures, but if it doesn't, the Korred itself will begin to engage. And it will use the Otto's Irresistible Dance and Command Hair combination first.
It's going to use this against whichever creature it thinks is going to be the biggest problem. Now, it's usually going to be the tank, but that could also be healers or back magic users.
Korreds can use their burrow speed and tremor sense to move underneath parties to reach characters in the back.
Right, they can use this to circumvent tanks or blocking characters if they want to. Now, keep in mind that Conjure Elemental and Otto's Irresistible Dance both use your concentration.
And honestly, Conjure Elemental is far more useful. So when you're planning a Korred encounter, make sure you include the CR of any Elemental allies you plan on summoning.
There's also a risk during the encounter that the Elemental could go rogue if the Korred loses its concentration, but they're pretty sturdy creatures, so it doesn't happen all that often.
Just be aware.
Now, a Korred can only do that Otto's Irresistible Dance and Command Hair combo once per day.
After that, it's going to revert to a different combination, namely Multiattack and then Command Hair.
Now, when it uses this combination, it should almost always use Command Hair first. This is because if the creature fails, it becomes grappled and restrained, and it will give advantage on the Korred's multi-attack.
Essentially giving the Korred a +5 to hit.
Now it says here, under Command Hair, that the escape DC is 13.
Now, this doesn't make much sense given the grapple and athletics check for a Korred should be around 19.
Right, but when you think about it, technically the Korred itself isn't what's grappling you, it's the magical hairs. So to escape from the magical hair, it's a DC 13.
That's a DC 13 grapple check, not a save. A target can also break free of the hair by destroying the rope.
Right, the rope has an AC of 20 and 20 hit points.
But the rope regenerates 1 hit point at the start of each round.
Now, something cool to think about is that depending on whatever material the shears that cut the hair were, it would change the material of the hair. So if a Korred, say, had adamantite shears, the AC wouldn't be 20 anymore, it'd be higher than that. And if you look in the Dungeon Master's Guide under the Objects Armor Class table, you can see what AC would be appropriate depending on the material. Based on this, though, I would just add 1 to whatever AC the table suggests to account for the magical nature of the hair. Now, it says Korreds are chaotic neutral.
Like most Fae. All this means is that they're more indifferent to strangers than hostile, but they generally prefer to be left alone.
Right, so normally, if people are encountering Korreds, the Korreds will just leave.
They have plenty of ways to escape. They can burrow, they can meld into stone.
Right, and Korreds really aren't going to attack you unless you somehow manage just to piss them off.
Or if the Korred was protecting something and it simply can't flee.
Right, so generally speaking, a Korred that's anticipating a combat encounter will have already summoned an Earth Elemental.
It will lie in wait concealed among the rocks or inside the stone itself.
Now, if the Elemental isn't enough to either deter or chase away or kill the Korred's enemies, it's going to join the fight.
The first thing the Korred's going to do from hiding is cast Otto's irresistible dance on whichever creature it thinks is the biggest problem.
Right, it's using this to gain advantage on its command hair bonus attack that it's going to use next.
Now keep in mind on subsequent turns, it's simply going to command hair and use its multi-attack.
Right, on subsequent turns, whether or not the creature is actually restrained, the Korred's going to follow up with a multi-attack after it uses its command hair ability, hurling rocks if they're able to, or charging in and using their great club to bash things if they have to.
Keep in mind that at the beginning of the counter, if they already summoned an elemental, it won't be available to them in their statistics.
Now, on the other hand, if an encounter between the PCs and Korreds happens unexpectedly, it wouldn't have had time to summon the elemental.
In this case, they'll simply start out casting Otto's irresistible dance on the biggest threat, and then casting Command Hair as their bonus action, and subsequent turns they'll simply cast Command Hair, and then use their multi-attack.
Right, and this is really their bread and butter. They cast Command Hair as a bonus action, and then multi-attack using their action.
They'll use this over and over again, rinse and repeat.
Something to keep in mind that Korreds aren't actually limited to one strand of hair. They can have multiple, and as the DM you can basically make them have as many as you like. So it's going to cast Command Hair every round, and if a creature's already entangled, it'll just use a different strand of hair to entangle a separate creature.
But remember, it can only cast the Command Hair on one strand of hair at a time.
Right, it's one strand per bonus action, basically. Now, keep in mind, a Korred's tactics aren't exactly super sophisticated. They cast Command Hair and multi-attack basically every turn.
Except for the start of combat. Either they'll have an elemental to attack things for them, or they'll cast Otto's irresistible dance to make casting Command Hair even easier.
Now, generally, Korreds are more likely to restrain their enemies than attack them. They prefer to target creatures that can do the most damage to them. So that's creatures using magical abilities or anybody with a magical weapon.
Or creatures who have the extra attack feature, like fighters, barbarians, and paladins.
Right, but Korreds aren't stupid. They're very shrewd on what they'll attack, and they know if they're outmatched.
Now the Command Hair ability makes it seem like Korreds take a lot of captives, but they have no use for slaves.
Right, and since Korreds aren't particularly malevolent in their personalities, usually what they'll do is they'll subdue creatures, and then they'll just move them to some remote location, drop them off, and release them.
But if you've managed to somehow insult a Korred,
say like if you tried to cut their hair without their permission, or you interrupted one of these special circle dances,
then the Korred is probably going to try to kill you.
But Korreds do value their own lives. So, generally speaking, we say that a creature suffers a morale failure once it reaches 1/4 of its hit points.
For a Korred, this means once it reaches 26 hit points or fewer, it's going to try to flee combat.
And it's going to do this by either using its Melt and Stone ability, or it's going to simply burrow into the ground and use its dash action to flee 60 feet through the ground every turn. Now, that's basically Korreds. They're fun, they're cool, they're interesting, but something you need to keep in mind, in the wild beyond the Witchlight, most, if not all, combat encounters can be solved through role-playing. And Korreds actually have a lot of things that would play into role-playing. In their innate spellcasting, Korreds have things like Commune with Nature and Stone Shape. Now, these aren't really combat abilities, but they can be used during roleplay.
Korreds can also speak Dwarvish, Gnomish, Sylvan, Terran, and Undercommon.
Right, they speak a lot of languages, and you can talk to them. Now, as a DM, any talking role-play encounter with a Korred should be hilarious. Korreds are basically designed to be underestimated, and they're funny as heck.
Korreds actually used to have a laugh ability back in 1st edition, where they could laugh and you had to save or you would be stunned.
Right, so in this adventure module, and basically all adventures, don't be afraid to roleplay and talk to Korreds, because you can have a really good time doing that. But that's basically it. We hope this helps you out getting started on using Korreds in any upcoming adventures, and preferably in the wild beyond the Witchlight, where we know you're going to encounter them.
They're fun Fey creatures in the Feywild.
They're interesting, they're hilarious, and you can really roleplay them up.
Think the Three Stooges or Chip and Dale.
Right, you can really have a lot of fun with these creatures. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Have a great one. Get vaccinated, wear a mask, try to love each other, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one. Is it time for school yet?
Bye!
Yeah, 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 yeah.